Hi, this is Don. I want to go over my LSPMI, which is short for Life Scripts and Parts Matrix Inventory. The LSPMI is not a personality test or a psychometric test. It's simply a data collection tool that I use in order to collect a lot of data very quickly and save us hours of session time. It helps us focus and zoom in on the parts of self that we need to work on and zoom in on parts of self that can help us do that. So, before we get into exactly how to fill it out, I want to go over a few things, including how the brain works. So, we have within our brain trillions of these little supercomputers called neurons, and they all connect together in various combinations to encode information. Every time we learn something new, we have a new neuronal connection that's made. Every 15 minutes that we're learning, we're creating dendrite connections. Dendrites are these branches that are coming into the cell body, these red branches on the outside, and the blue tail is the axon, and there's axon terminals that connect to other dendrites on other brain cells. So a lot of times we refer to the brain as a supercomputer. It's not entirely accurate because each cell is a supercomputer, and the brain then is wired together from in a myriad of combinations and configurations, connecting various networks together. And so it's like the internet, only it's much more sophisticated. If you look at a rendition of a brain slice, it would look like this. It's just one little slice of the brain, and these little clusters here are neurons that are all connected together, and encoded on those neural networks inside the neural matrix are different skills and behaviors and roles and emotions and beliefs and all the learning that we accumulate over the course of our life. To give you a little more of an idea, if you look at the cerebral cortex of an infant, you'll see a brain slice similar to this. It's a sparsely populated neural matrix at this point because infants don't need to know how to do much, and they start growing from there. 2 years later, in the 2 year old cerebral cortex, you'll see a lot of brain growth. That's called neurogenesis. And a lot of what was in the original neural matrix has been deleted through synaptic pruning, and new dendrite connections and new neural networks have formed over the years. And that just continues over the course of our life. And that makes us have some good news in that we've learned that with neuroplasticity, we can reconnect or reprogram various neural networks, and we can modify them through therapies of different types and ways that we can make changes. And they're biological changes. When we reprogram maladaptive or dysfunctional neural network into a functional or adaptive network, there's been biological changes in the brain with these various connections being made. So that's called neuroplasticity. Neurogenesis is brain growth, neuroplasticity is reprogramming and new programming. We learn new things all the time as well. And so, what we want to do with the LSPMI is to be able to identify some of the coded information, especially the maladaptive or dysfunctional information that we get triggered into. And we want to tap into our adaptive information as well, because when the adaptive information connects with the maladaptive or dysfunctional information, it updates the system. And so we need to start by being able to identify the different parts of self. And so this is kind of a metaphorical look at the various ego states or parts of self or modes that we get into. And so this is what we want to do with the LSPMI is get a general idea of what are the primary modes or life scripts or actors that are acting out a lot of the things that we get triggered into. So hopefully you remember the iceberg. There are 4 foundational videos that I'd like you to watch before you complete the LSPMI. And we start with the iceberg. And let me pull up my tools here. With the iceberg, you'll notice that the water line is a dividing line between our conscious and our unconscious mind. And beneath the water is our unconscious or subconscious or whatever you want to refer to that as. And we have a free floating mass of pain if we have any moderate to severe abandonment issues in there. And that creates a false sense of who we are. And that false self takes up a lot of space inside, and so inside isn't very hospitable. That's where all of our wounded parts are, and our protector parts, and our ego defenses or psychological defenses, whatever you want to call them. They are accumulated inside, under the waterline in this image. So you can go back and watch that if you haven't already. But there's also these cover ups or the masks that we wear, and these are invented selves or parts of us that are created in order to help us fit in. And we don't want anyone to find out how we really feel about ourselves, because then we might not fit in and we'll get more abandonment then. So you can go back and watch the iceberg video again if you don't remember the things I've covered so far. But also on the tip of the iceberg, these are firefighters. We'll talk about firefighters later on, but these are things that we do to try and find comfort and relief when all this starts to erupt and gets triggered. So we learn some ways of soothing ourselves on the outside because we can't find any comfort or relief on the inside. So this connects with my life scripts and parts matrix model. And if you remember, the parts matrix has two boxes at the top: growth mode and survival mode, self-actualization and self-preservation. And it is with self-preservation that the whole system lights up down here. When we're in growth mode, we're not triggered into any of these parts. But when we are triggered, you'll notice that there's fight, flight, freeze, submit, and attachment parts of self or modes of self. And each one of them have various parts of self that get triggered for various reasons. But none of those are the problem, though. The problem comes in here with the abandonment, shame, and contempt from the iceberg. A layer of that affects all of these various parts: the fight, flight, freeze, submit, and attachment parts. These are all normal parts of a healthy personality, but they're wounded with abandonment, shame, and contempt. And remember, the abandonment is a wound, shame is an infection, and contempt is a scab. I like to call shame an infection because it spreads throughout the entire system. You can go back and watch the LSPM video as well. It covers a lot about this. And then we have another model, and that is the language of reactivity, or the victim versus creator mentalities. And the victim mentality is when we get triggered into survival mode. I call it the language of reactivity because that's all we can do when we're triggered. Is those parts of self get triggered and they act out their scripts, their life scripts. And so I also cover a lot about the drama triangle, and I've integrated that with the modes model and the IFS parts of self and so forth. So if you notice, I will change a couple of things here. At the top of the drama triangle are where all the protector modes are. And the protectors are rescuers and persecutors. And the rescuers tend to be submit parts. And these are the parts that are people pleasing, approval seeking, self sacrifice, fixing and rescuing, just to give you some examples of what the rescuer does. And the persecutor is triggered when the fight parts come out. There's angry outbursts, the inner critics are demanding or punitive, and the submit parts try to manage the impressions of others, and the fight parts try to manage the manager. When the submit part doesn't manage the impressions and disappoints someone, then the fight part might lob a shame grenade over there and try to get the rescuer or the submit part to get back on track. When none of that manages and things blow up, then that's when the firefighters come in. So those are all in the top position, and this is a language of reactivity because that's the only language these parts know, and they have been there to help us survive. Maybe that's all the child could do when these parts were created, and with the wherewithal of a child, but they're not serving us well in adulthood. And so then the victim position is where the exile, wounded inner children are. And we have anxious and phobic inner children or panic attacks that come out of the freeze mode. And with the attachment styles, we have vulnerability or neediness or dependence or dismissiveness or whatever. We have a lot of different ways of connecting with others. There's also a video on the modes model. So go back and take a look at that as well. So again, what do we do with the LSPMI is we try to get a lay of the land, the inner landscape. And we want to be able to move from the dysfunctional maladaptive reactivity to the language of self-leadership. In order to do that, we have to know our parts that get triggered, especially the ones that are causing dysfunction in our relationships. And then we want to flip the triangle upside right. That will be presented in the attention focus model. So there's 4 videos to watch to help you understand where we're going with all this. And the LSPMI helps us sort out the inner landscape so we can do that. We all have a creator part of us that can create good things in our life, and we want to be able to get into the creator mentality. So again, that's what we're gonna do is try to get the configuration of the inner landscape with the LSPMI, at least the primary modes and parts of self and life scripts. So I'm going to share my screen now, and I'm going to, well, let me pull this up first. Yeah, I'm going to share my screen and show you what the LSPMI looks like and give you a few tips on how to use it. So bear with me one second. Okay. So this is the profile page of the LSPMI. This is where where all the data that's collected shows up, and we can start to analyze that data and get the lay of the land. But let me go back to the very first sheet. So if you look at this, the Excel spreadsheet has all the tabs at the bottom, different than the browsers have tabs at the top. The tabs are at the bottom, and down here in the lower left corner are some arrows. You can click the arrow that's farthest away. You can go back to different levels, different sheet. So we start at sheet 1, and it will look like this. And you'll see up in the corner, in the upper right corner, you'll see a scale 0 to 4, and it goes from totally false to totally true. You read each statement, and then you choose a number that best reflects how true or false that statement is. If it's totally true, it's a 4. If it's mostly false, it's a 2. If it's totally false, it could be a 0 or a 1. And so what happens is as you fill these in, then down here on line 17, in this case, the total raw score is added up, and then there's a formula that gives us the percentage. And the first 18 scales are very similar to all of that. If you slide through them, some of them have 10 questions, some have 15. Now, when you're going through it too, you might read a statement and it might occur to you, well, that depends. And usually what that means is it depends on whether I'm triggered or not. And so you want to go with when you are triggered. That's the best idea because that's when these maladaptive parts get triggered and these neural networks flare up. And so we want to be able to identify them when we do. So if everything's fine, a lot of these answers will be different than if you're triggered. So I always go at as if you're triggered. So I want to go past the sheet 18 and get to sheet 19. We'll see that there's clusters of statements. So this one's on psychological drivers, the hurry up driver, the try hard driver, please others, be perfect, and be strong. And then the next one is on injunctions. This one can be a little confusing because it's really hard to nail down without examples from your personal life. So, an injunction is a wounding messages delivered to a child who's younger than 6 years old. That's the imprint period. And the messages might come directly from a parent who gives the message, or it might come through the role modeling of that parent, or it might simply be a misinterpretation by the child. At any rate, these are 12 core injunctions that can be in play with a lot of people. And so we want to see what you think about those. So here the scale is 0 to 10, 10 being totally true. The first injunction or message a child might get, which becomes a mandate burned into their subconscious mind, is don't do anything. And then the example here is maybe a fearful, overprotective parent says, don't climb trees, don't run, don't try, don't go too far, don't get dirty, don't play rough, don't jump too high, don't go out without a football helmet, or whatever. And the message then becomes don't do anything, everything is dangerous. Don't exist is a suicidal injunction. Some kids get that message when they hear things like, if it weren't for you kids, I would have divorced that SOB a long time ago. Or see what you did. Why do you put me through this? And the message is that you shouldn't be here. You shouldn't exist. And that's a suicidal injunction. And thank goodness that kids can't follow through on that. At that early of an age. And when they turn 7 or 8, they start becoming more inquisitive, and they start figuring things out a little bit, so they can come up with some counter injunctions, which we'll talk about in other videos. But don't be close, don't be important, don't be a child, don't grow up. These are all messages that might be sent directly or modeled by the parent, or just simply misinterpreted by the child. And so there's 12 core injunctions here. And if you get hung up on any of them, you can email me and I'll help you work that out. 4 real common ones are don't talk, don't trust, don't feel, and don't think. These are the 4 basic rules of a dysfunctional family. Or don't feel that, feel this, or don't think about it, or you'll start to feel something. So again, where these yellow areas are, that's where you put the score. And those will be added up at the end. And then this is a little similar to the other sheet. This one helps us identify some modes and parts of self, like the demanding inner critic, and it gives you a little description of each one, the demanding inner critic, or the punitive, or the perfectionistic, the taskmaster, and so forth. And then there's some wounded or fragmented vulnerable child, ego states, or parts of self. They all have their descriptions. And again, it's 0 to 10. And you just put your score in there. And be as honest as you can with these, as candid as you can. And again, these parts of self are not something that you're going to experience in your walking around world if you're not triggered. In the right here, right now, they don't function unless they're triggered. And so they might get triggered a lot, and you might be in them a lot, but it might be less than that too. So go ahead and take a look at those. The firefighters, again, the tip of the iceberg. These are the addictive behaviors and the different ways that we might find comfort and relief, whether it's through taking care of needy others, or eating, or sex, or drugs, or gambling. Now, if any one of these areas is something you don't do at all, you can just leave them blank and there won't be a score in there. But again, the scores here are 0 to 4, and we're just trying to identify which of these are an issue when triggered. This one's on codependency, and this one's on sex addiction, gambling, computer and phone, workaholism, and so forth. Family roles: the family hero, the rebel, the scapegoat, the responsible one, the flashy hero. These just give us an idea of what your role in your family of origin was, because those tend to follow us into adulthood. And I didn't fill this one in the sample here, but these are psychological positions like I'm okay, you're okay, or I'm not okay and you're okay, or neither one of us are okay. But these are different psychological positions. Automatic negative thoughts, do the same thing. When you see the yellow, put the score in there. And negative beliefs about self. And there's some places down here at the bottom, number 22 through 26, where you can add your own negative belief about self if you have one that's not in the list already. And again, this is the profile that you'll have at the end. And this is where I'll be able to pull the primary modes and parts of self and life scripts out and put them in a summary called my self-preservation system. And then we'll target some primary areas to start, and we'll go from there. So that's what the LSPMi is for. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. And I will see you in the next video.